Welcome to Bible study. We're getting into Matthew chapter 6 today in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. We've covered so many wonderful topics already. We've been really focusing on the heart because Jesus is really hammering this issue over and over again. And of course, our heart is so important. The Bible teaches us that as we think in our heart, so are we. And so we have to realize that our heart is such a key part of us. And of course, God's not talking about that physical heart that pumps the blood. It's talking about that center of your being, the heart. We know we get saved by the heart. And the book of Romans talks about that. And it's a heart change. And, we talk about asking Jesus into our heart. And I know that's just a cliche, but it just shows us how important that heart is. And as we think in our heart, so are we. In Proverbs 4, it says we're supposed to keep our heart or guard our heart with all diligence. Jeremiah warns us that the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? So Jesus is focusing on what's on the inside. And again, we're talking about the Pharisees here. They were so concerned about what was on the outside, not only what they were wearing, but how they were perceived by people. Today, we're going to look at three important topics. We're going to talk about almsgiving, which was very, very prevalent back in the Bible days. They didn't have any social welfare, anything like that. And so there was a lot of almsgiving right around the temple. A lot of the sick and diseased, they would hang out around the temple. And of course, a big part of the culture was giving money to these pitiful people, giving of alms. And so Jesus hit specifically on almsgiving. He's hit specifically on prayer, because prayer is such an important part of our lives, even in the Old Testament as well as the New Testament, about talking to God and of course how we talk to God. Again, part of that culture, especially again the Pharisees, to be seen. Jesus keeps hitting that. They gave their alms to be seen. They prayed to be seen, and all the different things that they did to be seen of men. And fasting, of course, was another one. Very important how the Pharisees did that. But Jesus wanted to talk about the heart. Now, in chapter 5, in verse number 16, Jesus said, let your light shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. Now, is that a contradiction? Let your light so shine that they can see your goodness, see your good works. No, because here's the key with Matthew chapter 5, verse 16, that they will glorify your Father which is in heaven. And of course, what the Pharisees wanted, they wanted that self-glorification. They did not want to glorify God's kingdom. They wanted to glorify themselves. And of course, again, that's what Jesus is talking about here. I want us to understand today and remind us today that God knows our motives. He knows why we do what we do. And so it's very important to God that we do things with the right motive. Again, the Pharisees were not doing things with the right motive. And of course, Jesus didn't like that. And of course, Jesus hammered the Pharisees over and over again. I'm just going to read you a few verses in the Gospels. Matthew chapter 23, verses 6 and 7. They love the best places at feasts. Talking about the Pharisees, they love the best seats in the synagogue, greetings in the marketplaces, and to be called by men, Rabbi, Rabbi. They just love those titles. They love to be noticed. And then John chapter 5, verse number 4, Jesus was hitting on them, of course, because they were conspiring to kill him. And it says, how can you believe who receive honor from one another and do not seek the honor that comes from only God? And so these men were so caught up in glorifying themselves, and they wanted the glory from each other. They wanted the glory from the people. And it says here, what's their main problem? John chapter 12 and verse number 43 puts it pretty plainly. They love the praise of men more than the praise of God. And boy, when we get to that point, we're in a lot of trouble. And so why do we do what we do? What are your motives? What are my motives? Again, the first thing that Jesus hits on is he as almsgiving, and he calls them hypocrites. Many times, what is a hypocrite? A hypocrite, I can't talk today. A hypocrite is an actor. A hypocrite is somebody who simply wears a mask. And of course, we're not supposed to do that. We're not supposed to just wear a mask, be an actor. And of course, Jesus calls them hypocrites. And listen, each and every one of us can be a hypocrite at any given time. As a matter of fact, sometimes we point the finger at the church a lot of times, and I understand it. But, I'm not going to church, it's full of hypocrites. But if we're being honest, everything is full of hypocrites. Our political system, have you looked at that lately in Washington, D.C.? Certainly it's filled with hypocrites. Our educational system, our businesses, society in general, our homes, our marriage relationships. Sometimes we all put on a mask. And again, God sees what's under the mask. So Jesus hits on two things here. He calls them hypocrites. They're actors. They're not real. And of course, if there's anything society needs today, especially in this day and age, it's real. They need us to be real. They do not want us to be actors. And so the world has enough actors, and wow, we just need to be real. And it's hard to do sometimes because the flesh, and we like praise and different things like that. And they like to be seen. And that's a natural thing. Once again, I know when we raised our 7 children, I don't know how many times I heard, look, Dad, look. They want you to watch. They want you to see them riding that bike. They want you to see them climbing that tree. They want to show you that picture that they colored. They want you to put it on the refrigerator. And that's something that never leaves us even into adulthood. We need that confirmation sometimes, and we have to be so careful that it doesn't carry over into our spiritual realm, to do things for God and not for man. So Jesus hits on these things, and we're going to look at it in chapter 6, verse number 1. Take heed, that's a warning. And Jesus is giving us a warning today. Take heed that you do not your charitable deeds or your alms before men. And here's that terminology, to be seen of men, right? Otherwise, listen to this, you have no reward from your Father in heaven. Therefore, when you do a charitable deed or give your alms, do not sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets. Could you imagine that? Actually blowing the trumpet just to get everybody's attention before you did a good deed. But they sound these trumpets as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have glory from men. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward. It's interesting when you do a word study, and that word reward, it actually means a sales transaction, right? They are actually buying their own reward. And you know what? We're not supposed to buy our own rewards. And you know what? If we do that, that's all we get. But guess what? We have rewards in heaven. And that's where the moth can't get, the thief cannot get, the rust cannot corrupt it. And so later in chapter 6, we'll see this, lay not up for yourselves treasures in heaven, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Did I say that right? Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. And these Pharisees were content with getting treasures on earth by blowing the trumpets before they gave the alms. And Jesus said, hey, I say to you, they have their reward. They just bought their reward. So when we do good deeds to people, as we make the application for 2023, we don't need to let people know about it. We don't need to tell everybody about it. Guess what? The Lord that sees you in secret will reward you openly. And Jesus touches on this in verses 3 and 4. He said, but when you do a charitable deed or your alms, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. In other words, be private about it, right? He's not saying that every form of giving needs to be private. And I had conversations with people about this in the past. Some of the giving was very public. You know, when Barnabas brought his gift to the apostles and laid it at the apostles' feet. But what God is telling us here, it's about secret. It's about motives. The reason why you do it in secret is because you're not looking for praise. So when we do good deeds, when we do good things for people, let's do it for God, and let's do it for the glorification of God and his kingdom, and not for the glorification of ourselves. In verse number 4, it says that your charitable deed may be in secret, and your Father who sees you in secret will reward you openly. And then he hits on prayer in verse number 5. When you pray, you shall not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues. There's nothing wrong with praying while you're standing, but you know, the best prayer is when people are kneeling down in humility before God and bowing in reverence before God. And it says here, they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the corners of the streets. Why? Here we have that phrase again, to be seen by men. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward, right? Right then and there, when they get the praise of man, that is their reward. But you, Christian, when you pray, go into your room, go into your closet, and when you have shut the door, pray to your Father who is in the secret place, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. Isn't it sad that almsgiving became a sideshow? Prayer became a sideshow. They love to pray on the street corners, again, to be seen. Hey, when we pray in your closet, pray in private. Now, does that mean God's against corporate prayer? No. There's many, many examples in the book of Acts when the church gathered together and they prayed together. They prayed corporately and the place was shaken where they were. So there is a time, biblically, there's a time in our lives when we go and pray one with another in church or at a Bible study or any type of place that you decide to pray corporately. But God is talking about in your everyday personal life, in your personal giving. When you want to help somebody, don't do it to be seen of men, because that will be your reward. When you pray, hey, enter into your closet, pray in secret. You don't need a reward from men, a pat on the back, boy, you did great praying. No, God will see you. He will reward you. And you know what? We don't need the rewards of men because that's temporary. But the rewards of God is forever and forever. And so that's what Jesus says later in the chapter. He says, lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. And that's what we're supposed to do. Then the third thing he hits on is fasting. You know, this was perhaps the biggest area where they could put on a mask and put on an act and be hypocrites. Boy, they could just look all famished and just look all weak and sickly because they haven't eaten in so long. And that's exactly what they did. And as Jesus talks about fasting in verses 16, 17, and 18, Jesus says, moreover, when you fast, be not as the hypocrites or the actors with a sad countenance, right? For they disfigure their faces. Can you believe that? They actually made themselves look hungry and look sickly. And Jesus said they wanted to appear to men. And that's a key again. They wanted men to know that they were fasting and think that they were spiritual. Assuredly, I say to you that they have the reward. And then again, we have, but you, when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face. In other words, take a shower, wash yourself, comb your hair, look fresh, look fabulous, you know. You don't need for people to know that you're fasting. God will see, God will know, and God will reward you openly. And that's what Jesus said. And in closing, I just want to share a little word that we see in all three of those examples. It's when you give your alms, when you do good, when you pray. And then we just read it. We just read it. It says, when you fast. Notice how God expects us to do good deeds. God expects us to pray. God expects us to fast. And so God says, when you do these things, not if, but when you do these things, don't do it as an actor. Don't do it to be seen of men. Do it to bring glory to God and not to bring glory to yourself. And notice how in all three examples, God sees you. God sees you. God will reward you, right? God will praise you. And so what a wonderful lesson for us today. A little bit of a shorter lesson, but what are my motives? What are your motives? Hey, you know what? Even though people may not know, we can fool people, but one person we're never going to fool is God. I hope this was a help to you. Hope you have a wonderful day. It's just beautiful. And, you know, the fall colors are beautiful. And, of course, I hope to see you tomorrow night at Zoom if you're able to make it. And, of course, this weekend, looking forward to the Lord's Day. God bless.